Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Henry Dunn, and welcome to Radio 5G, here with my co-host Nancy Hopkins on Wednesday, October 30th, 2019. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning, Michael.
That's your cue to sound all perky and rise and shine, which I'm only sort of just managing myself this morning.
Well, when you gave the date, I was like, oh my God, October's gone.
Yeah.
I mean,
not quite. We still got Halloween left. We still got tomorrow.
We've still got tomorrow, but, yeah.
The ghost will come out tomorrow. Yeah, that's my Annie version.
Welcome out there, audience. We're so glad you're here.
Yeah, we're a little wackier this morning, which that's fine. It took us a few months to totally loosen up into the freedom to be wacky in the morning with you, our friends concerned about 5G. So anyway, we've actually got some pretty cool stuff to share with you today. Encouraging news on the growing worldwide movement to prevent this insanity, and we're going to start out this morning with an article that just came out from a major mainstream publication on the dangers of 5G. And that is Scientific American, which is pretty much the established oldest U.S. monthly magazine, issues a chilling warning on 5G. We're sharing with you a link from The Mind Unleashed, which is letting everybody know that this article took place. The article is entitled, "We Have No Reason to Believe 5G is Safe." That's from Scientific American in a recently published article issuing a stern warning about the known and the potential dangers of 5G technology.
I put the link in the chat.
Oh, great. Okay. So everybody following us can just pick that up and follow us along here. But most of the mainstream news articles that have been coming out on 5G, the few that have mentioned that there's protest, have tended to dismiss it or even just come right out and said, that it's alarmist conspiracy theory stuff. And this is a mainstream, well-established, conservative, highly respected scientific monthly, which is just coming out with hard facts. And that's, it's a crack in the wall of denial, right? Wouldn't you say, Nancy, in your view of what's been coming out?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes. But it's really weird to watch what's happening because I can't quite keep up with all of the postings that are occurring. But this particular article is key because it's coming. We have I can give you the link. Well, actually, if you go to this page, the first link you have, you go right to the Scientific American article. We decided to use this one because there's a lot of links in this particular overview of it, and it was very accurate as to what it is. So what you got there is a very established, wouldn't you call it, Michael, an established magazine that is now looking at it with, obviously a slant for the truth, not one for the propaganda. And that's big.
Yeah, let me just read, the Scientific American tends to, in their writing style, be, pretty conservative. It's less breezy, kind of entertainment oriented. Let me just give you the opening paragraphs to this article, which is by Joel M. Moskowitz, and it was published just a couple of weeks ago on October 17th. The telecommunications industry and their experts have accused many scientists who have researched the effects of cell phone radiation of, quote, fear-mongering, end quote, over the advent of wireless technologies 5G. Since much of our research is publicly funded, we believe it is our ethical responsibility to inform the public about what the peer-reviewed scientific literature tells us about the health risks from wireless radiation. The chairman of the Federal Communications Commission recently announced through a press release that the commission will soon reaffirm the radio frequency radiation, RFR, exposure limits that the FCC adopted in the late 1990s. These limits are based upon a behavioral change in rats exposed to microwave radiation and were designed to protect us from short-term heating risks due to RFR exposure. Yet, since the FCC adopted these limits based largely on research from the 1980s, the preponderance of peer-reviewed research, more than 500 studies, have found harmful biologic or health effects from exposure to RFR at intensities too low to cause significant heating. In other words, they're saying, hey, this is fine, your cell phone isn't going to make your face burn up, but meantime, 500 peer-reviewed studies show that it's not about the heating, it's about damage at multiple other levels. Further, and this is the Scientific American article, citing this large body of research, more than 240 scientists who have published peer-reviewed research on the biological and health effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic fields, or EMF, signed the International EMF Scientist Appeal, which calls for stronger exposure limits. And the appeal makes the following assertions, quote, numerous recent scientific publications have shown that EMF affects living organisms at levels well below most international and national guidelines. In other words, hey, your standards allow the telecom companies to harm people, basically the import of it. Effects include increased cancer risk, cellular stress, increase in harmful free radicals, genetic damages, structural and functional changes of the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on general well-being in humans. Damage goes well beyond the human race, as there is growing evidence of harmful effects to both plant and animal life. So, there you have it. And it apparently just got to a point where Scientific American said, we might as well not exist if we are not going to share hard science on such an important issue. So kudos to them for being willing to stand up. It's going to be pretty hard to attack Scientific American, based on their citing of 500 peer-reviewed studies and, hundreds of scientists who are signing an appeal to stop this. What are they calling it here, Nancy? Further down, there's
it's beneficial, I think, just to read it so that we've got it on the record. Because
okay, read the whole Scientific American article.
Go ahead. Let's just get it out there because it is as important.
Yeah, okay, let's go for it. Picking up where I left off. The scientists who signed this appeal arguably constitute the majority of experts on the effects of non-ionizing radiation. They have published more than 2,000 papers and letters on EMF in professional journals. So right there, that takes the, tin hat conspiracy theorists line out of the picture.
2,000 papers.
Yeah. Just a few, And
what is the other side put on the table? Well, we never studied the safety effects.
Right, and we're well within the standards.
Standards, by the way, the standards, are 100 times higher than the damage seen to DNA.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's what those 2,000 papers are saying.
Right, and it's based on research from the 1980s and standards put into effect in the 90s about it's okay if it doesn't heat your face. Well, meanwhile, you're getting cancer, you're becoming sterile, and
you can't think.
Can't think. Who does that benefit? Well, we won't go there. We won't go into the dumbing down the population or reducing our numbers.
Hey, I was dumbing down, okay? This is just a kind of an offshoot here. But when you said that, all of a sudden I got a picture of a kid in the corner with that hat on. That hat that they would wear, the dunce hat. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. And when you look at that, you think to yourself, it's something that we have been kind of like indoctrinated with traditional stories, and kid put him in with his dunce hat. Now, did you ever wonder what is the hell is this dunce hat thing? Do you know what it is?
Sure, it's that conical hat. Kind of looks like a wizard's hat.
But why would exactly? Why would they put that? Why would a wizard wear a hat like that? Why would they put it on a kid and send him to the corner?
Well, that's an interesting symbolic archetypal question about what does the shape of that hat
It's exactly. It's
and I think it goes back to Egypt even.
It's an energy device.
Ah.
You see, it's an energy device. That's why wizards wear it, and that's why they would put it on kids, hoping that maybe they'd have a magical, energetic, clear their minds and make them smart.
Right, and for fans of classic Saturday Night Live from the 70s, it's the shape of the Coneheads. We are the Coneheads, and we have come to your planet. Remember those guys?
Right. Maybe we should take a donation or set up a fundraising or something to get dunce hats for the governments of all the worlds and the telecommunication people.
Right, because they're dumbing the people down, and we need to smart them up.
Right, exactly. Anyway, sorry about that, but I had the image.
No problem. I like the flow of back and forth here. Instead of just talking too long myself. Okay, going on with entering into the record, the Scientific American article on 5G about the 2,000 papers and letters on EMF in professional journals published by these scientists who arguably constitute the majority of experts on the effects of non-ionizing radiation. The Scientific American article goes on to state, the FCC's RFR exposure limits regulate the intensity of exposure, taking into account the frequency of the carrier waves, but ignore the signaling properties of the RFR. Along with the patterning and duration of exposures, certain characteristics of the signal, for example, pulsing and polarization, increase the biological and health impacts of the exposure. New exposure limits are needed, which account for these differential effects. Moreover, these limits should be based on a biological effect, not a change in a laboratory rat's behavior. Yeah, well, we are being made the laboratory rats here for this massive experiment without permission. Going on, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified RFR as possibly carcinogenic to humans in the year 2011. Last year, a $30 million study conducted by the U.S. National Toxicology Program found clear evidence that 2 years of exposure to cell phone RFR increased cancer in male rats and damaged DNA in rats and mice of both sexes. The Ramazzini Institute in Italy replicated the key findings of the National Toxicology Program using a different carrier frequency and much weaker exposure to cell phone radiation over the life of the rats. So if, we feel, any of us out there feel some concern about increased cancer and damaged DNA, I think that might be worth taking to your local municipal officials. Going on here, based upon the research published since 2011, including human and animal studies and mechanistic data, the IARC, and again, the IARC is the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer. So when anybody tries to tell you, it's like, hey, well, the National Cancer Institute says it's fine, or the World Health Organization says it's fine. Well, no, they don't. And you can quote this article, look it up in the chat here, and send them the link and just say, check out the science. So the IRC has recently prioritized RFR to be reviewed again in the next 5 years. Well, we don't have 5 years. And there's 500 peer-reviewed studies out there, and people are dropping like flies. So maybe they want to speed that up a little. Going on with the article. Since many EMF scientists believe we now have sufficient evidence to consider RFR as either a probable or known human carcinogen, the IARC will likely upgrade the carcinogenic potential of RFR in the near future. Nonetheless, without conducting a formal risk assessment or a systematic review of the research on RFR health effects, the FDA recently reaffirmed the FCC's 1996 exposure limits in a letter to the FCC, stating that the agency had, quote, concluded that no changes to the current standards are warranted at this time, and that the NTP's experimental findings should not be applied to human cell phone usage. The letter stated that, quote, the available scientific evidence to date does not support adverse health effects in humans due to exposure at or under the current limits. Now, according to what we're seeing from Scientific American, that's a lie. It's a flat-out lie. It's a bald-faced, explicit lie. And surprise, surprise, that our government would do such a thing. Appalling. Going on, the latest cellular technology, 5G, will employ millimeter waves for the first time in addition to microwaves that have been in use for older cellular technologies, 2G through 4G. Given limited reach, 5G will require cell antennas every 100 to 200 meters, exposing many people to millimeter wave radiation. 5G also employs new technologies, for example, active antennas capable of beam forming, phased arrays, massive multiple inputs and outputs known as massive MIMO, multiple inputs and outputs, or MIMO is the handy abbreviation there, which pose unique challenges for measuring exposure. Millimeter waves are mostly absorbed within a few millimeters of human skin and on the surface layers of the cornea. That's, part of the eye. Short-term exposure can have adverse physiological effects in the peripheral nervous system, the immune system, and the cardiovascular system. And again, that is short-term exposure. The research suggests that long-term exposure may pose health risks to the skin, for example, melanoma, and yes, that can be a deadly form of cancer, the eyes for ocular melanoma, say goodbye to your eyesight, and the testicles. So say goodbye to your ability to reproduce. To say nothing of testicle cancer, which are two words that most men just shudder even to hear. Because there's only one remedy for that particular illness, which is amputation. Since 5G is a new technology, there is no research on health effects, so we are flying blind, to quote a U.S. senator. However, we have considerable evidence about the harmful effects of 2G and 3G. Little is known of the effects of exposure to 4G, a 10-year-old technology, because governments have been remiss in funding this research. Wow. Meanwhile, we are seeing increases in certain types of head and neck tumors in tumor registries, which may be at least partially attributable to the proliferation of cell phone radiation. These increases are consistent with results from case control studies of tumor risk in heavy cell phone users. 5G, and this is something, this fact about you're about to hear, folks, is something that we keep bringing up. 5G will not replace 4G. It will accompany 4G for the near future and possibly over the long term. This is what our friend Mark Steele, our courageous activist over in the UK, keeps pointing out. This is about, densification, multi-layered densification of the existing waves, because 5G is not going to improve your cell phone reception. People go, oh yeah, I can barely get a signal. I can hardly hear my Aunt Sally on this thing. It's not going to improve it because it's about data. It's about carrying data, which is where the telecom companies make the big bucks. Anyway, as you say here, 5G will not replace 4G. It will accompany 4G for the near future and possibly over the long term. If there are synergistic effects from simultaneous exposures to multiple types of RFR, our overall risk of harm from RFR may increase substantially. Cancer is not the only risk, as there is considerable evidence that RFR causes neurological disorders and reproductive harm likely due to oxidative stress. So, we're hearing this is an article aimed at scientists and people, familiar with scientific language, the scientific method. This is hard stuff. So it's pretty unassailable, and they've done us a huge favor by coming out with this article. Continuing, as a society, should we invest hundreds of billions of dollars deploying 5G, a cellular technology that requires the installation of 800,000 or more new cell antenna sites in the U.S., close to where we live, work, and play? Instead, we should support the recommendations of these 250 scientists and medical doctors who signed the 5G appeal that calls for an immediate moratorium on the deployment of 5G. So you might want to memorize that line. 250 scientists and medical doctors have signed the appeal for an immediate moratorium on the deployment of 5G and demand that our government fund the research needed to adopt biologically based exposure limits that protect our health and safety. So just to get specific about the author of that article in Scientific American, Joel M. Moskowitz, PhD, is director of the Center for Family and Community Health in the School of Public Health at the University of California, Berkeley. He's been translating and disseminating the research on wireless radiation health effects since 2009, after he and his colleagues published a review paper that found long-term cell phone users were at greater risk of brain tumors. His electromagnetic radiation safety website has had more than 2 million page views since the year 2013. He is an unpaid advisor to the International EMF Scientists Appeal and Physicians for Safe Technology. Well, our applause and appreciation to you, Dr. Moskowitz, and for Scientific American, for the publishers, and the board of directors, whoever approves the articles, for coming out with this. It's about as solid as you could ask for, and I'm glad we were able to share it with you. Any thoughts on this, Nancy, as we're rolling out here?
No, I'm just so grateful to the people that when you see somebody like the doctor here, and you realize that he'd been studying since 2009 after they published a review paper, which means that he had been involved in it before that. And it's so pathetic to think that so many people knew this so long ago, and yet we find ourselves in this situation. We've got to stop it. That's the only thing you can do. You have to stop it. And you asked me about that BioShield.
BioShield?
Yeah. And I'm telling you, anybody that tells you that they've got something that's going to protect you from 5G does not know what they're talking about. Because we got the millimeter problem, we've got the microwave problem, but we've also got the light problem from the LED lights and all the other things that are out there. This is not something that you can go at with any sense of being reasonable, because what you're encountering is absolute insanity. This is the Terminator concept. The big organization that's going to do everything for you. I mean, they have a water faucet now that all you have to do is say, give me 2 cups of water. What in the hell are you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Because this device right there, that one device, is throwing out even if you were able to somehow or another make you can't go around blocking this 5G. These signals, you just can't block them. They're coming from above you. They're going through concrete. It's like you cannot protect yourself. And if you find something like shungite does, attenuates 4G and below, because it's a different system. 5G is not the same system as 4G. And 4G was deadly. So, this is all these scientists that are talking out there, they're talking about 4G. They're talking about 5G now, but they got on, just like, Moscovich did, that he saw it way back with 3G and then 4G. So these people out there now that are talking, the database upon which they're talking is 4G. 5G is a death sentence. I can't make this serious enough for people to understand. Don't go wasting your time running around trying to find protection. You have got to use your time to stop it.
Exactly. Well, progress is being made on that front. Not fast enough yet, really, but it's major encouragement when we look at an article like this coming out in Scientific American, when we look at the action being taken in Hawaii to slow down the implementation of a series of drones connected together more than a football field across in order to covertly, it was the plan, spread 5G across huge swaths of the planet. Encouraging news when we look at Australia and the some 900 small cell towers that have been taken down due to the careful approach by Ray Broomhall, under which installation of 5G constitutes criminal assault under the standard definition of criminal assault in most places in the world, certainly in the West, in the U.S., Canada, Australia, and most of Europe. So to me, that's the good news. That's what I keep returning to, because once people have started to wake up for this, the genie's out of the bottle. When Scientific American comes out with an article like this, the genie's out of the bottle. And so then, when, God forbid, and it's already happening, people are getting sick, then there's just really hard evidence about negligence and, deliberate criminal negligence, the same as, the tobacco companies had to deal with. They knew the research on lung cancer. They deliberately suppressed it. Evidence finally came out that they undertook the same kind of advertising campaign we're seeing with, with Verizon and the Internet of Things. You will soon be able to download 3 movies at the airport gate in 30 seconds, with completely ignoring or actually whitewashing the case for demonstrable health effects. It's virtually the same kind of pattern that we saw with tobacco companies. So there is great room for hope here, and we may get back to this article a little more, but I'd kind of like to go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, let me just jump in here for a second for another sidebar type thing, because we've got a story. We've got a story about 5G doing all these amazing things for us. Every smart thing around you. God, you won't even have to think. Amazing. Okay, but they also are pushing this climate change thing, right? They got everybody really excited about it. The kids are crying. Oh my God, we're going through this, right? Well, this okay. Do you know that Okay, you probably won't be seeing too many polar bears in the mainstream media anymore now that the Climate Brigade has decided to drop the furry Arctic animal from its propaganda lineup. The reason, as we recently reported, was to do with the fact that, contrary to the prevailing climate narrative, polar bear numbers are increasing, not decreasing. In other words, despite the alleged pandemic of global warming, the melting polar ice caps, polar bears are just doing fine. So well, in fact, in some areas, hunters are being encouraged to kill more of them in order to thin out their population numbers. It's like,
wow.
We don't, okay, here's another one on the same thing, okay, and this is from naturalnews.com, who Google doesn't like. A lot of people don't, they're trying to shut them down with Mike Adams. Okay, this one, climate change hoax collapses as new science finds human activity has virtually zero impact on global temperatures. Okay, a devastating series of research papers has just been published revealing that human activity can account for no more than 0.01% centigrade rise in global temperatures, meaning that all the human activity targeted by radical climate change alarmists, combustion engines, airplane flights, diesel tractors, has virtually no measurable impact on the temperature of the planet. This was Finnish scientists spearheading the research, releasing a paper entitled No Experimental Evidence for the Significant Anthropogenic Climate Change. So,
wow. Yeah, and the tricky thing about that is, these days, of course, is that just that snippet of interview by you here on Radio 5G, just that snippet, right? If some attack site or mainstream site or whatever, they could go, okay, I can give you the headline. Anti-5G alarmists are climate change deniers. Because being called a climate change denier these days is virtually as bad as being called a Holocaust denier, right? Or being called anti-Semitic because you're not crazy about the policies of the State of Israel. It's one of these things where you go, okay, at some point you just got to say, folks, okay, go ahead and defame us or smear us or whatever. But there's science here, and we just encourage you to look at it. Climate change is real. There's no denying that climate change is real. Whether it's heading in the direction of warming or a new ice age, there is significant scientific evidence out there that it's actually ultimately heading toward a major global cooling trend that could, produce a new ice age within our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes. The bigger question is, when you look at the political propaganda being put out there in support of, the carbon tax, the whole Greta Thunberg thing, massive media coverage of huge protests and this, adorable, brilliant, assertive 14-year-old girl. What is the political goal? Major tax dollars, as I understand it, going where exactly? And this is supposed to actually prevent climate change. Now, we all understand about, the CO2 levels and the trajectories they're painting of how drastic the effects will be within our lifetimes, ocean level rise, etc. My impression as a layperson here, because I'm not a climate scientist, but that trying to sift through the propaganda, which we all have to do on a daily basis, there certainly seems to be climate change. There are certainly radical changes in the way things have ordinarily been on the planet. But it's, to phrase it as global warming is oversimplification. And I am just suspicious on a well-educated basis at this point when I see, massive mainstream media coverage of something, because the mainstream media is, in fact, owned by just 5 major conglomerates, all of which are controlled by a certain number of families, all of which have a vested interest in the fossil fuel industry, in, the globalist agenda. It's just common sense to take a healthy skepticism to these, propaganda streams that we're seeing. So, and that goes for the whole 5G Internet of Things propaganda campaign that we're seeing everywhere. We just need to take a breath, use our discernment, and look up the science. Nancy, do you have?
Yeah, I do, because
more about that Finnish thing. Yeah.
What we're dealing here with, or what I'm trying to do here, is to give you information regarding what's really happening with the 5G. Okay, because the 5G is a system of creating an electronic fence to control the population or to decrease the population. It will decrease because of the electronic fence, because there's a high rate of sterilization within these frequencies that is being already showing that areas of high densification of 4G are having very, very measurable drops in reproduction. Okay, so this is somebody up there, the families, whoever it is, that has conceived this nightmarish concept of control. And for most of us, we go, oh, that's just science fiction, I can't handle it, you're a nutcase. But if now I turn to climate change, which is people are much more comfortable with because they've had a lot of exposure to it, and we take another look at it and look at the facts, if you don't have any CO2, darling, the planet will go to pieces. It's not just oxygen, it's a combination of all sorts of things. So that, from the very beginning, making that a dangerous enemy to humanity and the earth is false. The second thing is that NASA has known for a very long time that the climate was going to change, but that was for a lot of reasons, but mostly the reason is that there is cycles, and the sun gets hotter. And when the sun gets hotter, certain things happen to the earth. I mean, this has just been going on. They got the figures. They knew it back then. But when they started this carbon, this whole carbon is what's causing all that crazy story. When you look at it really, you come out with it that, okay, everybody's afraid of carbon, and so everybody's getting together and they're going to have the carbon tax, which is the most ludicrous thing, because I don't even want to get into it, but basically it's a scam. It's a Ponzi scheme. It doesn't exist. You got this make-up money and called carbon taxes or they can use this much carbon. And it's monopoly stuff. Okay, so you got that squirrely thing happening there. And yes, when you are a sane person, you look at the whole scenario and you go, what is this about? And the only thing you can see that it's a benefit of is the people that are playing the Ponzi scam. And so you've got a situation where people who are logical, rational people are seeing that this is a ripoff, this is a scam to make money with the carbon tax. But in fact, that is a cover story for what they're really trying to do. They're trying to say to everybody, forget about your national boundaries. Forget about your national identity. You have got to look at this climate change as a world event and come together as humanity. So let's just forget about this concept of nationalism. And for God's sakes, make it so that anybody that is talking like somebody proud of their country is some kind of a squirrely, what do they call them, bigot or something. You know, because they're trying to break down all of those things that make us special and human. If everybody came together and we didn't need borders and all that, I'd be all for it. But I'm not going to be all for it if this is so that you can control the people that you're already trying to get up this electric fence as quick as you can, because their stories are unraveling.
Yeah, it's so true. This is one of the things that really provokes me, is this very phenomenon that you're describing here, that you've seen this gradual demonization of the word nationalism, and the idea that somehow erasing borders, washing away or watering down national cultures and languages and religions, by the argument that, well, we're facing a global crisis. We all have to just let go of this idea of national sovereignty and, each of you having your own interests. Well, I've got my own interests on my city block, and my neighbors have their own interests, and I respect their house, their property. Every man is, got his castle, right? And there are points of cooperation, points of unity within this understanding of privacy, freedom, and sovereignty. And it's the same thing at the international level. It's international, not globalist, international, meaning between nations. And if we were, rather than trying to water down national sovereignty in the name of the globalist agenda, and Agenda 21, which is like, oh, it's just a UN suggestion. Yeah, well, it's a UN suggestion that is being implemented in, provinces and states and communities throughout the world, which is specifically about bringing everybody into alignment with this agenda. So to me, it's like, the choir is not going to sound good. It's not going to sound any better if the sopranos are trying to sing like basso profundos or the tenors are singing like contraltos. We each have our voice. We each have our role. Islam has its unique voice in the chorus of adoration of the Creator. Christianity has its unique voice, as does Buddhism and Hinduism and Shintoism and Zen, etc. And as does each of the nations. As part of the beauty of this planet, the astonishing variety of human life and culture and language and customs. And these have evolved over thousands of years to adapt to the needs of these people. And, the idea that just needs to be washed away so that we can meet this global peril, it just tallies up too neatly with the rest of the agenda. And again, healthy skepticism, folks. That's what we're urging here. Healthy skepticism and discernment based on science and your own common sense. So, John F. Kennedy was a nationalist. Unabashed, America for the Americans within the framework of international law, human rights, and the International Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations in 1948. That's how it works,
Well, just for the record, I am a nationalist. I am proud to be an American.
Amen. Me too. And I'm delighted to meet Irish people who are proud to be Irish and proud of Ireland, or French who are proud of France, and Russians who are proud of Russia. They each have, amazing, unique contributions, and and a beautiful legacy in history to be proud of.
Well, I'm writing the book, Shungite Reality, and I got to a point where I was looking at quantum entanglement. And quantum entanglement is seen at the quantum level where two photons are like in the same place at the same time, and it gets very crazy. And Einstein said it's spooky things at a distance, but it's a very well known aspect of quantum physics. But you also can take it and look at it as something that is much grander than that, because we're all energy bodies. And when we come into this earth, we've got a basic energy blueprint called the energy signature. As we are born into a particular location, we begin to pick up energies that are, indigenous to that location. And our system as an energy body picks it up in things called parameters. And they're minute changes to the program the parameters are like added programs, a sub-program to your own signature, your own energy signature. The people you meet, your DNA, all of this makes these different little signature changes so that every single human being is totally unique. And it goes back to last week's show when we were talking about Huxley and Wallace said, well, do we need freedom? What's the point of it? And do we need to be individual energy fields? What's the point? What's all that about? It's the same answer. If you are all the same and you don't have all of this uniqueness associated with not just the land but the stories of the culture, the information that you pull in, your experiences, all that is very sweet and makes us all different. If we don't have that ability, if we're all reading the same books, being told the same things, thinking the same way, watching where is the creativity? Where is the expansion of experience and knowledge? And if we don't have that, then what's the point of God putting us here? Because God is trying to experience life.
Well, exactly. And the other side is trying to experience control and domination, and this whole concept of evil. When you look at like the word diabolical, well, I'm into etymology, and that etymological root of di, of diabolical, is the same as in division, and this is essentially that which separates unity into multiplicity, or into two, right? That is, it's about the illusion of separateness from source. That is the job in the big cosmic scheme of what you could call the satanic force, which is to drive creation out away from source, out away from the creator, and to convince us that we are separate, to convince us that, that ultimate pleasure resides in control of others to your own benefit, because others are other. They're not you. They're separate others. And your pleasure lies just in, making yourself bigger, more dominant, more controlling. And it is, of course, a complete illusion, because quantum entanglement and the rest of quantum physics and mysticism of all ages has shown that we are, in fact, of essence one, in the soul, in our consciousness, that, we're like little bottles floating around in the ocean, and the water inside the bottles is really one with the ocean, but we've got this cork in our bottles of delusion of separateness. And so when you're talking about this, you're looking at, well, what does freedom matter? Mike Wallace asked Aldous Huxley in the interview we shared last week, right? Well, do we really need freedom? Well, as Nancy's saying, that, we need freedom if we want to be human. We need freedom if we want to experience life as God intended that we experience it. Somebody asked, I like this quote from the gospel. Somebody asked Jesus, why have you come? And he says, I am come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. And that's, you look around, why did God create how many thousand species of beetles? Was this necessary? No, God is playing, right? And God's play gets a whole lot more restricted when you have a globalist agenda to wipe out national sovereignty, individual cultures, separate religions. And ultimately, do we need freedom? Ask a further question. Who benefits if we don't? According to what values and what agenda? Well, no, we don't need freedom if all we want is a well-controlled, dumbed-down, moderated, controlled, tedious, boring, flat existence of drones in service to a corrupt elite who, by the way, have their own 5G free zones, have protected their kids, know very well what's going on, in terms of the ultimate effects of this. It's the same old story for any collectivist agenda that says, for the good of all the people, we must now ask you to surrender some of your rights. Last week, we asked you to surrender some rights. This week, we're going to have to ask you to surrender a little bit more of your rights. And then gradually, you ain't got no rights. Meantime, what's it really about? As George Orwell said in Animal Farm, all animals are created equal. But some animals are more equal than others. And that is the agenda, historically, of the corrupt elite. So, this is just stuff we've got to be aware of. We've got to rise above the fog of disinformation and see these trends, historic facts. This is just the way, history has operated over and over again. But now push has come to shove and the stakes have never been higher. And we're talking about the fate of humanity with the 5G rollout. So, yeah, I'm a proud nationalist, proud to be an American, proud to be the descendant of Irish immigrants, German immigrants who came here at a time when this country did still represent a place of opportunity and freedom from corrupt factions elsewhere in the world. And by God, we're going to keep it so, one way or the other. God bless America. And then there was a pause.
And then there was a pause because I just thought that, but I didn't put it up here. What did I do with it? Okay, I know where it is. I just thought that probably we should play. I think it's just over 2 minutes, to be honest with you. Ally MacGraw.
Oh, yeah. Let's hear from Ally MacGraw. For our younger viewers, Ally MacGraw, famous actress whose career back in the 70s and early 80s, most notably Love Story with Ryan O'Neal from the novel by Eric Siegel, right? And her famous line, love means never having to say you're sorry. Coming out against 5G, Ally MacGraw.
Now, where is she talking?
As I understand it, in Santa Fe.
In Santa
New
Fe.
Mexico.
New Mexico, okay.
Good evening, Mayor Gonzalez and Council, and thank you for letting me speak as a relative newcomer to this extraordinary city. I've only been here 23 years, and I live in Tesuque. My name is Ally MacGraw. I live up really in the country. I came here because my house burned to the ground in Malibu in 1993 from one of those fires. A mere 14 years later, a similar fire broke out, which was the direct result of a cell tower fire. I can tell you from having lived on a street where 15 of us lost absolutely everything, that this is not an experience to be taken lightly. I moved here, kind of to my surprise, learning to love the incredible multicultural ancient history of this city, the amazing air, the killer landscape and nature, and the biggest surprise of all, which was a community that pulls together and is really concerned about our quality of life. Something I think is very, very rare. I've lived in 2 other cities and not had this experience. For many, many years, I have heard of the serious, really serious damages that being exposed to cell towers give us human beings and animals. I've heard it from people whose life's work it was. I've heard it from people at the farmer's market whose passion it was on the side. I have to be honest and tell you, I was absolutely flabbergasted when I read the proposition. When I read that it would be possible for those of us that so cherish the way this Santa Fe is in its healthiness would be confronted with surprise appearances of up to 500 cell towers. I don't care that they're littler or more charmingly designed. The fact remains that this horrendous health-challenging energy, it can be coming at us at any time. In fact, that school proposition near Gonzales shocked me because I have kids and a grandkid. The idea that we could wake up with these things all over this city, these eyesores, to destroy this ravishing, increasingly unique place to live, makes me want to join the hundreds of names on this petition which say, no, not without citizens' contribution. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Wow.
and she only got like 3 minutes to, give her spiel. This is what I love. Yeah, you freedom of speech. Come up here for 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's what they did to us in Taos at the county commissioners meeting. There were 300 protesters showed up, and a list of experts, all signed up to give testimony. And yeah, the county commissioners were nominally on the side of free speech. And so those county commissioners are going to be replaced. We do still have democracy. And they have really ticked off a lot of their own citizens. 10% of the population of Taos signed a petition to stop the change to the land use regulations that provided a backdoor to 5G towers coming into Taos. So, okay, we're coming up on our break here on Radio 5G, and when we come back, I look forward to sharing with everybody. There's a unique conference taking place in southern Colorado in the coming weeks. That a unique conference of spiritual leaders, scientists, sacred activists, at which our esteemed friend and colleague, Nancy Hopkins, my co-host here, will be giving a presentation remotely from her home base in Florida. I will have many of these people will be present in person, but Nancy will join us remotely via Skype, talking on the remarkable healing and restorative properties of shungite. So when we come back, I look forward to sharing with everybody the extraordinary nature of what I will call the sacred science breakthroughs that are taking place around the world right now. On Radio 5G, we are very much about the practical tools, 3D, boots on the ground, civic and political and legal tools to stop the rollout. And there is also the crucial lever of consciousness and of working with metaphysical reality, which is where change begins. And we need to keep reminding ourselves of this. And so we are really excited about the people who are coming to our conference here. It's an invitation-only conference. This is not open to the public, but it will be filmed by a noted Academy Award nominated documentary filmmaker, William Gazecki, and will be available to everyone on YouTube. So we will take our break now and have 4 minutes of spiritually revolutionary music of some kind provided by Nancy Hopkins. See you in 5 minutes, folks.
And we are back.
Wow, I love that. That is...
I knew you did.
Yeah, that is totally awesome. Wow, what a great rendition of that Paul Simon classic. Thanks for that. Okay, well, rolling on here. Welcome back to Radio 5G. This is Michael Henry Dunn with my co-host Nancy Hopkins, and we've been sharing with you today Scientific American's article coming out with an unabashed warning about the dangers of 5G. And so let's roll on into what I was sharing with everyone. You know, one of the unique things that I really appreciate about what we're able to bring to you, and it just happens to spring from my background and Nancy's background in what I like to call sacred activism. You know, that's not a term that Nancy, I think you use quite so much, but essentially it's, you know, it's about a blend of understanding of the spiritual dynamics and the hard scientific facts, political facts, geopolitical reality, 3D tools. My friend Andrew Harvey, who is the wonderful writer and activist who coined the term sacred activism, what that's about is the reality that activists, let's just say human rights activists, whether it's, you know, those who are trying to take down the human trafficking rings, child trafficking rings, or those who are campaigning to prevent the environmental pollution or cruelty to animals, any number of these causes. You know, particularly those who work, for example, with Amnesty International, who are trying to expose and prevent torture around the world. This can get unbearably bleak as a life of dedication to justice, to peace, freedom, healing, human rights, given everything that we know that's going on in the world today, given what you have to see and experience and endure. If you are empathetic to your fellow human beings, what you have to feel and witness in terms of the pain of your fellow human beings can be so heartbreaking over the long haul that you eventually burn out. You suffer from, you know, just deadening, loss of empathy, loss of the fire of inspiration and compassion that fueled your work in the first place, because you don't have an inner source of inspiration that sustains you. And so what Andrew Harvey urged was that for the activist needs to have a spiritual practice, needs to have a way, even as simple a way as Nancy described to us last week when we talked about this. It's not like you need to have some rigorous meditation program. Just learning to move in a flow of communion with source, of inspiration, of presence to life. This is, you know, the sacred aspect of being a sacred activist. And it allows you to have a continuous flow of reassurance, of harmony, of connection to life, connection to source. Call it whatever you will. Call it God, call it, the Divine Mother, call it, Krishna or Kali or the Infinite Light or Allah, Ilaha illa Allah. No, that is the meaning of this term. And so what I'd like to share and hopefully explore a little bit as we're balancing out our 3D on the ground activist tools to stop the rollout of 5G and providing you with the hard scientific evidence from the Scientific American article, just to go into to share with you and to get Nancy's thoughts on what we'll be presenting here in Crestone, Colorado, which is famous as a mystical retreat and interfaith community. Coming up later this month in November, there's a remarkable conference, an invitation-only conference called Blue Star Rising, Breakthroughs in Templar Sacred Science. And this is being sponsored by the Sacred Academy of Global Evolution, which began here in Crestone last year, essentially based on the legacy of the work of Reverend William Bueller, U.S. Navy commander retired, and a legacy also of ancient Templar sacred science. Particularly with Bill Bueller, it has to do with what is known as the Templar science of the Rochelle, which is about the grids of Gaia, the ley lines and energy grids of our planet, which have been used for many thousands of years by what we could call the more ancient Templar stream that goes back beyond the famous medieval order, back to the Cathars, the Sufis, the Essenes, Pharaonic Egypt, possibly as far back as Atlantis, in the right use of the ley lines and energy grids of our planet for creating sacred centers of spiritual power that uplift humanity. And it's been very well demonstrated that this science was used by Templars and other builders of megalithic sacred sites at Stonehenge, in the construction of Notre Dame, Mont Saint-Michel, Chartres Cathedral, and elsewhere, that these sacred sites are very clearly aligned with these ley lines and grids. And even more interestingly, in recent times, the crop circles are precisely aligned with these same sacred sites and with these same grids. This was part of the remarkable work of our dear friend Bill Bueller, who passed away last year. And so we have created a conference coming up in November. There are a number of really significant breakthroughs going on, particularly in sacred geometry, what we'll call sacred mathematics. We have some amazing researchers, scientists, sacred activists who are convening here later in November. And a particular interest, I'd love to share and also get Nancy's response to what is known as the Holy Grail Protocol, and to explore a little bit, of course, the miracle of Shungite. Nancy will be presenting on Shungite. And I am really delighted to be welcoming my dear friend Alan Green, who's an amazing musician, but even more than that, a pioneering scholar and researcher whose breakthrough work on the Shakespeare sonnets, the geometry and mathematics contained within the Great Pyramid, and has been working with Robert Edward Grant on a sacred mathematics breakthrough that was recently recognized by an invitation from the Dalai Lama. Just a couple of weeks ago, they had a transformative audience, extended audience with the Dalai Lama, who had heard of their work and specifically invited them to Dharamsala in the foothills of the Himalayas in India, where the Tibetan government in exile has its headquarters. And so I can share with everybody, I will share a YouTube link to some of Alan's work, which specifically goes into, it has its roots in the Shakespeare authorship controversy, which is a fascinating story in and of itself. Nancy, have we talked about that connection at all?
No, and I know nothing about it.
Okay, do you have an interest in it? Am I going to be talking your head off and that of everybody else?
No.
It's a fascinating connection. It does connect to our work.
Yes, go for it. Because you've mentioned it many times before, and I've gone, I wonder what that's about. So, yes, please tell me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, I'm better off when I've actually got a story to tell. And this is going to go a little bit of, far afield from 5G, but it'll come back around, and the journey's worth it, believe me. So I am a classically trained actor, done a lot of work in Shakespeare. I had a 15-year career in the theater before I moved on to other concerns, and it's still a major part of my life. And I've done a fair amount of Shakespeare. I was with the Chicago Shakespeare Repertory back in the 80s. And I had always really resented what I regarded as this bogus notion that you hear some people throw around, that Will Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon, right, the son of a glove maker from a provincial market town, which is what Stratford is, this notion that, no, I'm sorry, this kid only went to grammar school, and you've got the greatest plays and poetry in the English language, and he couldn't have written this. It had to have been some nobleman who went to the university, because the plays are just too learned and brilliant and deep, and it just couldn't have been. And that always ticked me off. I thought, it's a bunch of snobs who don't want to believe that a middle-class kid could just, by virtue of his own genius, be, one of the most gifted writers, if not the most gifted writer of all time. And then, in the early 90s, I was given a book called The Mysterious William Shakespeare by Charlton Ogburn, which very dispassionately and objectively went into the primary evidence. It said, okay, are these people nutcases? What is the basis for this doubt? Is it just some snobs or tin-head nutcases or conspiracy theories? Does this sound familiar? Right? Or is there actually something going on here? And really, it's just like with 5G. If you buy the propaganda, you won't look behind the curtain. If you look behind the curtain, you see the evidence. And then you go, holy Toledo, there's actually an issue here. There's not merely an issue, there's a huge issue. This was kind of my training ground as a sacred activist, was in the Shakespeare authorship controversy. So I started to do some research, because it starts out with, what's the basis for doubt? Why would anybody even begin to doubt that Shakespeare wrote the Shakespeare plays? It just sounds like, on its face, a wacky notion that people who've got nothing better to do than to try to, come up with conspiracy theories would say. So here's what it is. The most powerful evidence that I can reference that pretty much puts it in a thumbnail sketch for folks is, when you're a writer, you leave a paper trail. Even 400 years ago, you leave a paper trail. You're paid to write. You write letters to your friends and you mention your writing. Your friends write back to you and they mention your writing. If it's Elizabethan England, you've got a patron, some nobleman who says, "Oh, yes, we are going to confer upon our worthy servant Will Shakespeare the sum of £20 per annum for his worthy service to literature, blah, blah, blah." And so this is what you'd call contemporary, personal, literary evidence, or CPLE. And I'm going to think of the name of the wonderful scholar who wrote this book. I'm going to pull it up as I'm speaking about it because I want to give her due on this. She wrote an article called Shakespeare's Orthodox. She wrote a book called Shakespeare's Orthodox Biography. So when you are looking at a life, you are looking at evidence, and there's a paper trail. And if you look at the paper trail on Will Shakespeare of Stratford, you would think, hey, this is the most famous writer of all time. For a good 200 or 300 years, scholars have been, beating the bushes for the tiniest little shred of evidence about the guy, of a paper trail about the guy. And this is from Diana Price, her book, Shakespeare's Unorthodox Biography. New evidence of an authorship problem. We've got tons of personal, literary, contemporary evidence, meaning from when they lived, that all the other writers of that time were writers. Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, Kidd, Lily Green, all these people, Elizabethan scholars will know who I'm talking about. We've got letters, we've got records of education, we've got records of patronage, we've got, records of publishing. And in the instance of Shakespeare, we've got zero. The evidence on which his authorship is based is posthumous. And there are significant documentary gaps. There's the chair of the Oxford University History Department, a man knighted for his contributions to history, came out in a letter and said privately, there's a serious problem with the Shakespeare authorship, and we're not willing to look at it because it's a holy cow. I'm paraphrasing. But it is ridiculous. I think ludicrous was the word he used, that there should be this documentary gap. Okay, so why would this happen? Well, once again, it comes back to entrenched interests and political power structure. Because the Shakespeare plays represent, on one level, a propaganda project. And the government likes to protect and hide propaganda projects. They don't want to come out to you and say, hey, the Internet of Things is going to save everybody's life, and you can just talk to your faucet and say, give me 2 cups of water, and you can have your baby's Pampers automatically signal you when they need replacing, and isn't this great? And oh, by the way, this is propaganda on behalf of entrenched interests in the big telecom companies. They're not going to come out and tell you that, all right? Same deal back in Elizabethan England. They aren't going to come out and tell you that the history plays being performed at the Globe Theatre to rouse patriotism are designed to support the Anglican Church and the regime of Queen Elizabeth I against her enemies over in France, against, let's see, excuse me, am I getting a message? Yeah, okay. Against the conspirators with Mary Queen of Scots, or against, the Spanish Armada. Elizabeth's regime was under threat from multiple sources. And so there's a document extant from a guy named Thomas Nash, in which he specifically comes out and says this, that, that the people who don't know the inner secrets of state are unaware of the policy of plays and how the government uses the playwrights to shape public opinion and to rally them in support of the government rather than have them be hatching divisive plots. Is this sounding familiar? So they just happen to have one of the greatest geniuses of all time in the service of this propaganda project, who couldn't help but, illuminate the human spirit, who couldn't help but enrich the English language, who couldn't help but be who he was. Who he was, however, was not the front man, because who he was, by all accounts and my personal conviction, was the 17th Earl of Oxford, the Lord Great Chamberlain of England, Edward de Vere, who was rumored on fairly substantial evidence to have been a lover of Queen Elizabeth and was at one time his favorite courtier. He was known to be a brilliant playwright, known to be a brilliant poet, and mysteriously, his plays and poems are somehow lost to history. And another document states that there are many noblemen poets who choose to publish under other names. So here we have, let me just, try to round this out for you, because once you get me started talking on this, it's a rabbit hole that's quite deep. Essentially what it comes down to is that in order to protect a propaganda campaign, a front man was used, and this was commonly done. Ben Jonson, another famous playwright of that era, says, "Oh yes, I published this and I chose not to use front man, a batilis as it was called, to take the focus off of me, using a false name as the writer." And so this is well known. And you're running up against, just like with the telecom companies and the propaganda campaign, the mythic status of Shakespeare as the greatest writer who ever lived, as one of England's biggest tourist industries, as virtually a deity. There's something called bardolatry, which means worship of Shakespeare. This is what you're running up against if you dare to try to point out the facts. It's also very analogous to 9/11. When 9/11 happened, I totally bought the notion that it was all Arab terrorists, and I was enraged, like, all Americans who had that same understanding. And people would come up to me and say, "Hey, this is really an inside job, and there's these corrupt factions that just pulled this off, and it killed 3,000 Americans just to be able to, provoke a war on terror and make trillions of dollars in defense spending and control the populace and limit our freedoms." I was furious at the notion of hearing about this. And then gradually, somebody finally gave me a book that just looked at the facts without any big agenda or what sounded like wacky conspiracy. There's just the facts behind 9/11. And just like with the Shakespeare thing, as circumstantial evidence began to pile up and pile up and pile up, I had to reach the shattering conclusion that, oh my Lord, I can't ignore this. Are we talking about awareness of 9/11, but they didn't do anything? Are we talking about awareness and the kind of help to make it happen and they didn't do anything? Are we talking about awareness, they knew about it and they helped make it happen and they planned it? And gradually, all the circumstantial evidence, and this is in a book called A Second Pearl Harbor about 9/11, the evidence, the hard evidence became unignorable, and I could not ignore it. And my worldview had to change. I was just your typical patriotic, middle-of-the-road, centrist Democrat American from Chicago, and I had to deal with the fact that there were clearly extremely dark factions operating behind the scenes that were seeking to control humanity through false flags and have been doing so for a very long time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask your patience and let me pause for about 10 seconds while I let my very frozen-looking dog in from the door where she's going, "Hey, it's 5 degrees out here. Pause your radio show." So, Nancy, if you've got anything to say in the next 5 to 10 seconds, I'm going to go let Nuala, the dog, in from the 5-degree weather. Hang on a sec, folks.
Well, interestingly enough, and he probably wouldn't know this, when he brought 9/11 into the situation, the 9/11 buildings were 110 stories, and all of a sudden they kind of puffed and there was all this smoke, and then you have a pile of rubble that's 7 stories. My question is, where did the buildings go? Well, the buildings came down because of a resonance frequency. If you can match the frequency of the building and you vibrate it, it loses molecular cohesion and falls apart. So if you're thinking in terms of a building of cement falling apart into dust with virtually everything, the only things that survived were plastic, okay, and paper. Anything that was metal was gone. Now, one of the things that people have, and this is kind of brutal, but I want you to kind of get a feeling of this, okay? I'm sorry I have to tell you this. But when you go back to that day, one of the things none of us like to think about was the amount of suicides. People jumping off the buildings. Some of those people were jumping off of floors that had no fire on them at the time they jumped. They were not in danger. Some of them were on telephones talking to people, talking about they felt like their skin was burning. And if I'm right about the fact that direct energy weapons were used against the Twin Towers to take them down, then those people were essentially being nuked by microwave and millimeter and submillimeter waves. That's 5G. That was their first demonstration of what this weapons technology could do. And so they've told us that, no, we don't have that. That's not what it is. So they'll tone it down, but that's the potential. That's why I press the fact that you have got to think of this as a weapons system. Are you back? Is the dog okay?
The dog is fine. She came galloping in from the freezing weather, very happy to sit by the fireplace. But yeah, I'm hearing you. This is what our friend Mark Steele talked about when he's looking at, he's looking at the piece of 5G tech that the ticked off guy on the installation tower threw at him, and he says this technology is designed to be capable of an extreme intensity. Why did they design it? To be capable of an intensity that approaches lethal weapon technology. And as you say, they can dial it up to 1, or they can dial it up to 11, and it's about the potential. It, as has been brought up many times, 5G began as a weapon system. That's just a fact.
And they've been using the 4G densification. It's gotten continually more and more and more to effectively jam your brains up. The power of this electromagnetic energy really it causes friction in your brain. Friction causes heat. Heat causes expansion. Now you've got pressure in your brain. You can't think right.
Right. So you're saying that some of these people may have jumped simply because of excruciating pain, pressure, and psychological disorientation?
Their bodies were on fire.
Wow.
They were cooking in a microwave oven.
Yeah, that'd make me want to jump.
Yeah, I'd have jumped too. But this is the reality. People don't like to look at that part of it. It was too real. But, the real story is that, this was not explosives. This was not fire. This was direct energy weapons causing a vibration. But anyway, you were talking about the
Shakespeare thing.
The conference.
Right, the conference. And it actually does, tie in and come back. I mean, there was a study done about so-called conspiracy theories and the psychological profiles of people who are willing to investigate the evidence behind these theories versus the profiles of people who stonewall in denial and refuse to look at the evidence and who use, pejorative terms like conspiracy theorists to just dismiss it. It found that actually those willing to investigate them, those willing to form a conviction based on the evidence and hold an opinion that differs from the rest are actually, according to normal standards, psychologically much healthier than the people who go into stonewalling denial and refuse to look at it. So ironically, the real nutcases, at least in terms of what psychologists would call, healthy psychological profiles, the real ones who are outside the spectrum of normal are the ones who stonewall in denial and label everybody, who's looking at these things as nutcase conspiracy theorists, which I certainly ran into. Let me just, getting into what the conference is about. This Shakespeare authorship story was really just background on a cryptographical code breakthrough, which then led to sacred geometry discoveries regarding the Great Pyramid of Giza, which led to a further pretty astonishing unification of a number of mathematical constants that have been known to mathematics, to mathematicians for centuries. And this was largely the work of Alan Green, who is a noted amateur scholar and musician who has done breakthrough work on cryptography called Time AI from a company called Crown Sterling, headed by Robert Edward Grant and working closely with Nassim Haramein, who may be familiar to many of our listeners. And so just a quick little story about how this happened. If you do a YouTube search on Shakespeare equation, you'll find some really fascinating 10 to 12 minute overviews of how the sacred geometry hidden on the cover page of the 1609 edition of Shakespeare's Sonnets reveals sacred geometry within the Great Pyramid of Giza and the exact longitude and latitude of the Great Pyramid to within an accuracy of 900 feet many decades before longitude had even been made workable. So what finally emerged from this, when Alan's work brought him into working closely with Robert Edward Grant and Nassim Haramein, is a cryptological breakthrough working with prime numbers pretty much into infinity that cracks the encryption of virtually every encryption known to man, is my understanding, that they are able to crack military-grade encryption and above in minutes using this code. And of course, that's enormously threatening. They presented at a conference in Las Vegas a few months ago, a cryptographical conference where you've got all the cryptocurrency people, you've got the FBI, CIA, NSA, everybody involved in encryption gathered together at a conference in Las Vegas, and here come these guys and demonstrate something that pretty much shatters their world. But it also, the Time AI discoveries, from what I understand, and again, you're listening to a layman on this, but if you do a YouTube search on Crown Sterling, Time AI, as in artificial intelligence, there's a 4-minute video that gives the background. But it also holds the potential to create ultimate freedom and safety of encryption beyond anyone's capacity ever in a trillion universal cycles to violate your privacy. So it's simultaneously something that threatens the vested interests and also potentially champions human freedom like nothing before. It represents an immediate threat to the cryptocurrency people because that's all about ultimate privacy, but could potentially, provide cryptocurrency with unassailable privacy. So that is my layman's understanding of how it plays out. They received an invitation shortly after this conference from the Dalai Lama, who tracks innovations in science and mathematics. He has a deep interest in it, has been conferring with leading scientists and mathematicians for many years, and he invited them to come to India, to Dharamsala, where the Tibetan government in exile is and where the Dalai Lama resides, for an extended audience with him. And I recently had a long talk with Alan on his return from India, and the Dalai Lama cleared his schedule once he began to talk to them. He said, clear my schedule of everything else. This is worthy of many hours of my time. The Tibetan Lama, who was his assistant, later told Alan and his team that in the 30 years in which the Dalai Lama has been giving these audiences and interviews to people, he's only done that, cleared his schedule, on 2 other occasions, which was to talk to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Nobel Peace Prize winning activist from South Africa, and for Michelle Obama. So that gives you some idea of the impact of this work as in the view of the Dalai Lama, who was very encouraging in terms of future collaborations. So Alan is going to be presenting at our conference in Southern Colorado, Blue Star Rising, Breakthroughs in Templar Sacred Science. And this will be available on YouTube. We are also welcoming Mary Hardy, Dr. Mary Hardy, who is the originator of the Holy Grail Vortex protocol of working with toroidal energies in a practice of sanctified intention, which has powerful energetic breakthroughs and elevation of consciousness properties. They have practiced this vortex protocol at numerous power sites around the globe, Stonehenge, Notre Dame, various sites where the grids and ley lines of the planet converge. And what has frequently taken place, and I've heard this personally from some of the practitioners, they will go and start to practice this toroidal energy work, and they know that it effectively pierces the energetic clampdown net that has been put in place over the planet with an assertion, a peaceful assertion of human sovereignty in communion with divine, with inherent divine power and the use of the forces of nature. And then when they do this in these holy sites, they do it for about 30 minutes in these power places, and then frequently they're suddenly getting buzzed by black helicopters or dark tinted window, dark black SUVs show up out of nowhere because these energy grids get monitored by the factions that also know about the grids and ley lines of planet Earth, that have also been using them for their own purposes. And however, they can't really arrest these people. They're just standing peacefully in a circle near a power spot, exercising their sovereign rights to invoke sacred energies for the elevation of human consciousness and the freedom of humanity. So again, I encourage everybody. We are to do a YouTube search on Mary Grady and Holy Grail Vortex. There are YouTubes instructing you in how to practice this sacred technology. The point of this conference, Blue Star Rising, it's not open to the public. This is invitation only. It will be available on YouTube. The point of it is to bring all of these researchers together and to share between these pioneers the realities of what's going on, because there's just synergy and magic and great increase of impact. And this is the flip side of the 5G, of the movement to stop 5G. These are the metaphysical tools. This is the sacred communion. This is the aspect of being an activist, where you need to tune in to have some kind of path of an inner life and an inner source that can keep you going. And that, moreover, is really, on one level, you could look at it as the reason for life, like Nancy's saying. What is God doing down here? Expanding life, expressing, creating, thriving, in multiplicity of forms, in infinite variety. That's the name of the game. What the Hindus call the cosmos, they call it Leela, which in Sanskrit is God's play. It's just the divine play, and the point of the game is, over the eons, for us to wake up to the fact that it's just a game, that it just appears to be, endless, separated variety, that there's this hidden unity of love, this hidden unity of divine joy, which gradually we all come back to through the long, excruciatingly endless journey of reincarnations, thank you very much, to this realization. And so in the meantime, in between time, down here on planet Earth, we're dealing with a direct threat to that divine play, to our identity as humans, to simply to life, simply to having children and being healthy and having your freedom to be either a Democrat, a Republican, or a Tea Party, or a socialist, or whatever the heck you want to be. Regardless, folks, 5G represents a lethal threat to that. And for us to pull together in our individual sovereignty, our sovereignty as Americans, as human beings, as each of us for our own nation, our own culture, our own language, our own path of understanding towards God, but within the framework of international cooperation and harmony and human rights. That's the name of the game. It isn't about globalist washing out of our identity and sovereignty. So this conference is bringing together deep practitioners of Vedic healing science from India, such as Alex Utterman, bringing together Mary Hardy and Gail Mack, of what is effectively a sisterhood of the Grail in practicing the Holy Grail Vortex, and a number of other, that we have a noted researcher, Dr. Diana Mesa Staley, on the Bosnian Pyramid, the recently discovered Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun, as it's being called, which is many thousands of years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and is now appearing to be kicking into action and emitting energies, and research is being done on whether the energies coming out of the Bosnian Pyramid right now are correlating with the Schumann resonance fluctuations, the wild Schumann resonance fluctuations, for those of you who follow this. And maybe we can bring you in, Nancy, again on this, because I think we've just been discussing that with our good friend Falcon Britt. Anyway, I just want to share with you that pioneering work is being done by the Sacred Academy of Global Evolution, which is, in a joint project with Cosmic Reality here on Radio 5G. And we're really excited about sharing it with you and bringing more of it to your attention as the YouTubes become available. And that's going to be filmed by Academy Award nominated and Emmy winning documentary filmmaker William Gazecki. So that's the news from Southern Colorado. Any thoughts on what I've shared here, Nancy?
Well, I have been fascinated by the Bosnia Pyramids, but I didn't hear this recent update. That's fascinating. The connection with the Schumann resonance, because, you know, who knows what these pyramids are? Because this is, I mean, for those that don't know what we're talking about, basically a man who was going around the world to study pyramids lived in Bosnia, and when he came home, he all of a sudden looked at what he was always thought were hills and realized they were pyramids. Do you remember his name?
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up here in just a second, because I've got I have been sent a copy of the research paper that Dr. Mesa Staley, who's speaking at our conference. Just a moment here. Screenshot that line. I'll bring it up in a moment. His first name is Sam, and I want to get this correct, of course. Creating a network. But yeah, the pyramid in question, I mean, when you look at it from a distance, it's just a hill. It's covered with trees. And wow, that hill looks almost exactly like a pyramid. Just a coincidence. Must just be a coincidence, because, of course, it's, I think, 2/3 again as tall as the Great Pyramid of Giza. And organic material has been found inside the pyramid, and carbon dated to 24,000 years old. And that's just pretty much impossible as far as the orthodox Egyptology is concerned, which is the pretty absurd notion that the Great Pyramid of Giza is just the tomb of the pharaoh Khufu, and it's only 4,000 years old. Never mind that the flood markings on the Sphinx indicate that it was built at a time when that part of the Giza Plateau was extremely wet and had regular flooding from the Nile, and that's 10,000 years. So that doesn't work for the usual histories that they would have us believe. So the paper is entitled "Exploring the Translation of Megalith K1 in Bosnia." This is from Dr. Diana Mesa Staley, a PhD anthropologist, data scientist, and a researcher. The Bosnian pyramid site was discovered by Dr. Sam Osmaganic, a PhD, a Bosnian-born resident of Texas. And he is the director of the Institute for Anthropology at the American University in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and established a nonprofit and non-government archaeological park, the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun. It's a foundation to pursue the excavation and geoarchaeological work. You can go to that at http://PIRAMID, pyramid with an I instead of a Y, ASUNCA.BA. He discovered the pyramids in this little farmer's town called Visoko in Bosnia and Herzegovina, 15 miles northwest of Sarajevo, in 2005. There are several pyramid structures and many tunnels connecting the structures in the area. And the Pyramid of the Sun, known as Visoka Hill, stands at 720 feet. It dwarfs the Great Pyramids of Egypt. And so this is a fascinating presentation. Essentially, there is a lineup of intention in the material being presented at the conference. The point is to put powerful, practical tools in our hands that all of us can use on a daily basis to seize the lever of consciousness to shift the energies on our planet to help us get around the corner of this global crisis, to help us roll out the Shungite field, roll back the 5G, the 5G disaster. So anyway, that's as much as I want to share on that. I'm really thrilled that Nancy Hopkins will also be presenting remotely to the conference, because to me, when I keep coming back to it, oh yeah, the Shungite field is probably the most powerful tool, the most amazing gift we've been given. Can you share do you have any updates, Nancy, on the Shungite Bees project and how the Shungite field rollout is going in terms of that wonderful Shungite grid of how it's spreading around the planet?
Well, I have to assume it's all happening because so many people don't report back. I don't know what the map is showing now, but there was like over 100,000 points that were, or at least views. Excuse me. Let me put it on the grid map that shows where Shungite's being put. But Shungite certainly isn't decreasing in popularity. Now, earlier, when we talk about 5G, and I say to you, don't go through this whole thing about trying to protect yourself from 5G. What I should have said, because we got to stop that. But 4G is still a problem, and Shungite will mitigate the problem. That's just a fact. CosmicReality.net is where the Cosmic Reality Shungite store is. And we call it Gaia's Gift because this particular deposit that came from outer space. Now, you'll hear people that say that, no, it was created on Earth because the early vestiges of life, started decaying and created this field. That's just not true. And I'll tell you why. Because within this field, which is about 1,000 kilometers square, about 800 miles, and it goes down to, I've heard, up to 400 feet deep, but I think it's probably more average around 200. So you got a large deposit there. In that deposit, there are things called C60 molecules. They're carbon molecules, very large, very powerful, and they connect to the quantum field, allowing for Shungite to have its magic, and magic is really only the manipulation of energy. So it's the C60 molecule in the Shungite that's the proof that it could never have come from some kind of decay into carbon-based composite of minerals. That can't possibly happen because to make a C60 molecule, which they first discovered in a lab, they didn't know it was even a naturally occurring molecule, but naturally you find it when you see a bolt of lightning has hit certain rocks. You'll find C60. In a couple of the meteorite craters, they found C60. There's a few other mines that have C60, but very this is all trace amounts. And then you got Shungite that is, it doesn't have, like a vial of C60 in a nugget. No, it's got a few C60s. But we'll get into that maybe someday. But anyway, the C60 can only be created within an environment of heat. And there's no heat hot enough that in that first, concept that could make a C60. So it had to have come from the cosmos. So you've got C60 that is just a magical molecule that has been essentially constructed within the interstellar regions of space. And as it travels, it picks up all sorts of other energy. So it's nothing compared to what you get in the lab. But the C6, if you go to the Shungite store, you'll find things that you can do right now. Get an environmental kit to help you live in the environment you've got right now with the 4G, so that your minds will start clearing and your bodies will start feeling better and you'll be able to do things. So I highly recommend Shungite. My job, it's to get it to people, and if you get we can mitigate the 4G environment. So it's still not good, but the more Shungite you put around you, the safer you're going to get. So go there, cosmicreality.net, and you'll see it says Shungite Store. It's full of information on all of this stuff. And there you go. We're running out of time.
Okay. Well, I'm always glad to get in a plug for Shungite. We used to be, careful about not wanting to seem like we're pushing this, that, or the other thing. And Nancy, of course, you've always been very emphatic about telling people, here on Radio 5G, we are not telling you that Shungite is going to save you from 5G. Only stopping 5G will save you from 5G. And Shungite, of course, does have proven protective qualities for EMF and Wi-Fi up to 4G. So I'm glad we're being unabashed about it. And Nancy's company, Cosmic Reality, has, in my experience, the highest quality products and the best information and the highest level of commitment to service of just about anything else I've seen out there, and especially with the Shungite Bee project, for making sure that the amazing restorative qualities of Shungite when it comes to preventing bee colony collapse and restoring bee colonies to just massively thriving levels. That's something that is a huge indirect impact for humanity because, of course, the bees are key pollinators for the food supply for the entire planet. So, very happy to have, always let everybody know to get a Shungite environment, create a Shungite environment in your home, in your being, have a Shungite stickers on your laptops and on your cell phones and nuggets in your water, and go to cosmicreality.net. I heartily recommend it and can endorse it 1,000% from my own experience. So we are at the 12 noon hour here in Mountain Time in Colorado. And thanks, everybody, for joining us here on Radio 5G. This is Michael Henry Dunn with my co-host Nancy Hopkins, and we're a joint project of the Sacred Academy of Global Evolution and Cosmic Reality Radio. And take heart, everybody. Spirit will win, humanity will win, and preserving our unique and individual voices in united song, right? Sovereignty and unity. That's the idea. At least that's how it seems to me. So God bless us, everyone. We'll see you next time.